Hi friends, you're listening to Liz the Magelion's commentaries on the Cosmic Switchboard Show. I recently wrote a blog post called Empire of Dirt in which I discussed the song Hurt by Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails and the idea that we all have empires of dirt that we've inherited, often through trauma in our childhoods and throughout our lifetimes, from societal institutions and other schools of thought, which at times I believe would be better called schools of influence. In that blog post, I wrote about people whom I referred to as Peter Pans, who have never grown up and who perpetuate the cycle of abuse on those around them. These Peter Pans often go on to become social justice warrior types, or often have a hidden hand up there behind like a puppet, which operates how they interact with the world around them. I can speak about these Peter Pans quite well, and I can notice them because I've been one. Anyone who has the courage to deeply delve into shadow work becomes familiar with their inner child. And those of us who have been through trauma, which I would say is the majority of society, if not everyone to some extent, absolutely have wounded inner children. Part of my work recently has been reconnecting with my inner child and doing a lot of shadow work as I work through trauma memories. When I used to watch a lot of YouTube videos and do more research in alternative media, I remember hearing a lot about shadow work, but I don't recall anyone I listened to actually discussing how to do that. So that's my intent in this commentary today, to share how I've been working with my inner child beyond the shadow work I did previously to generate growth in myself. There are two ideas I'd like you to consider, two themes I will present. One is imagination, and the other is the inner child. Let's begin with imagination. Our imaginations are very real spaces with very real impacts on the world around us. This is a great secret that is held in place by one of the Empire of Dirt piles that is passed to us from society, and then trickled down upon us by our parents, teachers, peers, etc. Those who traumatize children deeply understand this idea of the imagination being powerful, and they use it to their advantage. That's why we're told things like, it's only your imagination, you have an overactive imagination, the imagination isn't real, and imagination is just for kids, you need to grow up. These words keep us imprisoned in the belief that imagination is all the BS we're told it is, that it's fake, we're being childish, we're not in reality, and who wants to be in this reality anyway? So the first lesson to learn here is the imagination is real. We've been tricked into believing it's not. The second lesson is the bad guys, let's call them the abusers. They use your imagination to exploit you. So of course they're going to fill your head with nonsense about what it is. That's their war tactic. They want to control your imagination so you can't become the creator that you are. And that's lesson number 3. You are a powerful creator, and it all begins inside of your imagination. It is critical to take dominion of your imaginative space and make it your own, however you envision doing that. Because if you don't, other things will happily step in, take control of this space, fill your head with limiting thoughts, beliefs, ideas, and constructs, and restrict your imaginative abilities. Therefore, it's of utmost importance to get to know your personal imaginative space and make it your own. Let's now shift focus to the inner child. I will be weaving the ideas of both the imagination and the inner child together to form a greater picture. Many of us MyLabs experiencers, those who have faced SRA, PTSD, and other mental health challenges, know that we were targeted in childhood. In childhood, we are closer to source. We have more of a purity about us. Our energy is untainted by the societal empires of dirt. We are straight shooters. We call nonsense when we see it. We speak truth. Over time, and due to social conditioning and other various forms of indoctrination, our ability to recognize truth and to speak truth can be eroded by the experiences we have had. It's like an external force slips a dirty pair of reading glasses over our eyes that are covered in fingerprints, the fingerprints of outsiders. And over time, these glasses and so-called more mature ways of thinking cloud our vision. This is where inner child or shadow work comes in. When you take the time to pull off those reading glasses and start noticing and cleaning off the dirt and fingerprints, you begin to see more clearly. For the last 11 years, I've been noticing and questioning why I believe or feel certain things. Initially, I started with looking at my beliefs, values, and fears. We are taught to trust people whom we call experts, but why do we do that? Usually it's simply because they hold the title of being an expert, and therefore we believe they know something more about ourselves than what we know. However, you are truly an expert in your own body and in everything to do with you. Therefore, you know what's best for you, and most people who work to develop their intuition will tell you this. This was just one of the beliefs I had to break down, the belief in experts, or somebody outside of me having more knowledge about me than myself. You are the expert inside of you. You instinctively know what you need in any given moment, and by cleaning the dirt off of the glasses being an external force imposed upon you, you will truly get to know yourself and the power that lies within. That said, this shadow or inner child work isn't for the weak, and really taking a good look at oneself can be beautiful and also deeply humbling. You may discover, as I have, that growth is continual. There is no final destination, or at least I haven't discovered it yet, in which you finally reach this euphoric place where you feel perfect inside. But I found that doing this internal work has amped up my intuitive abilities by helping me to notice distortions in thinking, limits in thinking, where beliefs have held me back, and that our society would do a heck of a lot better if more people did this work, because one really ceases to react, and you begin to respond from a place of peace and inner strength when you reconnect with your inner self and your natural intuitive processes. To do that, you need to start releasing all of the old beliefs, judgments, ideas, and stuff that was put into your head through school. You need to be willing to let all of that go at some point. What I'm currently working on is facing CPTSD, which seems to be a wild roller coaster of a process. Some days I feel awesome and balanced, and then other days I'm a collapsed wreck who can hardly get out of bed due to overwhelming emotions, new memories, flashbacks, and the like. There were days even recently that I didn't know if I was going to make it and be able to go on with all I was facing internally as a direct result physically, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually of PTSD. For me, I began to notice how abandoned I felt while processing trauma. Some common themes that came up for me specifically resulting from trauma included abandonment issues, feeling jealous of others and how they seem to have their lives together, feeling unlovable, feeling perverse, and a deep self-hatred, which at times would manifest in self-harm, suicidal thoughts, and a sense of utter desperation, especially whenever I felt controlled by someone else, which meant I was out of control of myself. I have many more issues that I'm working on, but I wanted to list some of the main ones, so you know that I'm speaking from experience and I'm still working through this. I'm not an expert, but I'd like to share what I've learned. The current COVID climate really brings these things out in people. And just as a side note, some of my family members and I have been calling the newest C word Corvid, because I feel it's like Beetlejuice in a way, and I will not call it by name as I don't want to put my valuable energy into it or into creating the collective idea of it at this time. So if you hear me say Corvid, know that I'm talking about the mind virus. I know the actual word, but again, I don't want to say Beetlejuice 3 times and give it more power. Doing inner child work began for me with a decision to reparent myself. When I was little, I used to think adults had it together. Now that I'm an adult, I realize my inner child has it together better than most adults. Many of us have issues or complaints in regards to our parents, our families, and how we were raised. You don't have to have experienced trauma to have these feelings. We often decide to change and do it differently with our kids, and there seems to be a cycle that repeats, where the kids then feel they weren't raised how it would have been best for them. So learning to parent oneself is key, especially when it comes to acting like a spiritually evolved adult in this world, which is full of Peter Pans. I have even noticed that when I must engage with a Peter Pan, if I can meet their inner child instead of the raging arsehole in front of me, things go a lot better. Some of the Peter Pans respond well to a parental figure of sorts, just listening to them, or validating them with a, "You seem angry, what's up?" And then a sincere, "Sorry you feel that way, how can I help you with this?" Or following however your intuition guides you to speak with them. It can be helpful if you find yourself face to face with someone who is reacting. If you can stay in that response zone, in which you're the coherent thinker, you have an advantage over the situation, even if it's better for you to get away quickly instead of engage. In terms of how I do inner child work, in the past, I followed a Hawaiian method called Ho'oponopono, which is still really effective to this day. To quickly summarize what this method is about, basically you engage with your inner child when an issue, such as a trigger or a health scare, or whatever it may be, comes up. You notice your inner child, and I do this by envisioning my inner child in front of me, and then you provide them with the compassion and support they may not have received before by saying 4 very basic yet powerful things to them from your heart. These things are, "I love you," "I'm sorry," "Please forgive me," and "Thank you for showing this to me." You can go into as little or as much detail as you choose, but I found this to be most effective when I validated that my inner child had been holding on to the issue for a long time, and I acknowledged how difficult that must have been, and that I was sorry for not noticing it sooner. And then you invite your inner child to let the issue go by visualizing him or her releasing it. I used to imagine blowing the issue or issues into a balloon, and then from my imaginative space, I'd watch those balloons float up into the sky and away. This process was excellent over the years in helping me connect with my inner child and release issues like anxiety, depression, and even physical issues that were plaguing me. However, I've been using a more intuitively inspired process as I navigate through the PTSD waters. So over the last year, I've invited Elizabeth, which is the name I went by as a child, to work with me. I began by reassuring her that it was safe to come forward and that I'd do everything I could to protect and provide for her in ways she hadn't been provided for and protected as a young one. She was reluctant at first because she hadn't had a great track record with adults who promised to keep her safe, but I kept it simple. In the beginning, I would start with basic things like asking her what she wanted for breakfast. I'd been on a health kick for years, but Elizabeth wanted a toasted English muffin with peanut butter and honey, so that's what I ate. It felt awkward for me at first to throw out the super strict healthy adult diet I was following, but I needed the opportunity to fall into gentleness. And in doing so, Elizabeth began to trust me. And then I was introduced to other aspects of myself as a child that wanted to be healed also. There are many different versions of me as a little one. One of my Elizabeths is what some SRA therapists might refer to as a garbage kid. One of my inner aspects who took a large amount of abuse and pain, who was discarded due to non-compliance and her resistance of the perpetrators. I don't like the term garbage kid because the abuse I lived through was horrific, and that's what's garbage, not my inner child. Still, the term garbage kid refers to a discarded or killed off child part. I prefer to call her my little warrior. She's a fierce little thing who has visibly been through battle, and when I see her in my mind's eye, she looks like a neglected child who is bloodied up, bruised, with greasy unfixed hair and torn clothes. Her resistance of evil and her strong will, as well as her willingness to work with me to heal, is what has been helping me to become free internally. Coming from a family in which keeping up appearances and looking a particular way and presenting myself in a certain manner was of utmost importance, there was a part of my adult self that wondered how I could love this dirty, broken aspect of me. Which is really sad to say out loud, but it's true. I'd been raised to always be presentable, physically, mentally, and emotionally, and like they say in some circles, to keep sweet, which means always presenting as a good and perfect person, and not asking questions or making trouble. This little warrior version of me was not any of this. She was a mess, a crumpled mess. I remember describing her to my therapist, who told me, "You don't look beautiful after you go through battle." And in that moment of understanding what battle does to a person, I loved her instantly, my little warrior. She was scared and huddled in a corner of my mind, but I imagined hugging her and giving her safety, security, and love, things she never had while she was in battle for me. After that, she opened up to me more. I realized that by denying this aspect of myself, by denying that I could be dirty and broken and scarred and in pain, I was denying a powerful, remarkable aspect of me. And that is shadow work, integrating all parts of you. From there, I began to notice a spirit of joy in doing things that I enjoyed doing as a child. I began to look at the people I considered successful and happy around me, and I noticed how they had hobbies and energy to do things outside of work, which I never had when I was working a regular 9-to-5 job in front of a computer, which literally sucked the life out of me. As of right now, I'm still embracing the spirit of gentleness with myself as I work up my energy reserves, because this trauma stuff is exhausting, especially if you've been holding it in for decades. But I've noticed that the more I do creatively, the more I focus on doing fun things, the more energy I seem to have. I have found that getting on the same level as my nephew has been very therapeutic for me and for my inner child. My nephew is a year and a bit and quite a stoic little fellow with a been here, done that look in his eye, and getting him to laugh has given me much joy. I like mimicking whatever he's saying and saying it with him, and we have a really good conversation, despite me not being totally fluent in toddler. There's a lot of reading of body language, facial expressions, and getting lost in those moments when you're more present and experiencing pure joy and having a belly laugh, which is really important when you're dealing with any form of trauma. And to be honest, I find our society right now extremely traumatic. I believe that the contrived chaos manufacturers who have a monopoly on information and what's released to the public want us to constantly be in spaces that are not of joy, love, gratitude, and those higher frequency emotions. They want us to be in fear, misery, and desperation, so they bombard us with uncreative, repetitive robot messages over TV, radio, on billboards, and on little posters and whatnot. It's a big demonstration of their power. But have you ever heard the saying, "A lion doesn't need to tell me it's a lion"? I believe they do this because at the root they're weak in comparison to heart-based humans like us. They don't seem to have those high-level, high-frequency, beautiful emotions that we have, which heal. Again, those feelings of love and joy. And so they seek to dull ours and bring us down to their level of destruction, bleakness, negativity, and fear all around. Most of us know if we turned off the TV and unplugged from their broadcasting system, this wouldn't have even become the thing that it is. I find myself sometimes scrolling mindlessly through my phone, and I've made a promise this week to my inner child that I will not be checking social media, I will not be checking news. And that's to keep my child safe. At this point, the manufacturing of fear has gotten so out of control, it would take a huge number of people unplugging from it to make a difference. It's ridiculous how hooked up and addicted they have us. My point in bringing this up is that these tactics are how they hijack your imagination by broadcasting all of this stuff constantly and immersing us in this fear soup. They hijack your inner child, which is one of the most powerful aspects of you. And as a parent, are you going to let them do that to little you? I've decided that that's not okay for me. So again, I go within and I create. And some of the most creative spaces you can be in are those in which you invite your inner child to help you, to work with you, and to help you make decisions. When you get back to that childlike state, you are more in line with coherence, which means you are in your heart space. You're more grounded. You're less likely to be influenced by society and the mainstream programming that they're so conveniently offering to you. And that, again, is where your true power lies. Doing these commentaries helps me to get into a creative space. So does my work and experimentation with crystals. But the most potent place I've found healing has been inside of my imagination. I think a part of me really resisted going into the imagination, partially because of the ideas of, how silly it is. But I also knew if I went there, it would get very, very real. And it has. And I've learned that this is a place you can create a lot of change for yourself and a lot of healing if you just allow your inner child, your intuition, and your heart to guide you. Think of the worlds you created when you were younger. I remember in my neighborhood, we used to have these huge water fights. We lived in a court, and there were at least 7 different houses with kids in the area. And we'd all get together with our super soaker water guns and water balloons, and some of us used garbage can lids as shields. We'd be hopping fences and hedges as we played, hiding behind houses and trees, and you could tangibly feel the battle in your body. Like, it was intense, but it was awesome. We were all psyched up and completely invested in the game. And the realm we were playing in wasn't just physical. We were existing in another dimension simultaneously, the space of our collective imagination, and we were all having a really good time. It was all play, and it was all very real. So I ask you again to think of those imaginative spaces, also known as paracosms, that you created when you were younger. I know that years later, those places were very real. Some of my imaginative spaces from my childhood actually line up with friends that I've met years later, which just proves how real imagination is. Some of the places I went when I dissociated under extreme trauma kept me safe and helped me to survive those experiences. I had to go somewhere else to protect my soul, my heart, and my physical body. I know that there are many of you listening who have had to do this too. And this is our advantage. We have a lot of practice and potency in doing this. What if we could all pool together our amazing imaginative spaces, those places we went to under extreme trauma? What if we joined worlds, like I touched upon when I brought up the neighborhood water fight, and the collective imaginative space we were in while we played? What if we went all in on creating exactly what we want to see? What do we have to lose right now? What would we build for our future? What would we build for this present moment? What are our greatest dreams as we watch these dirt piles collapsing around us? This is where our power lies, not in the stories we're fed on the regular created by some wrinkly old rich guy in an ivory tower, or some parasitic entity, or whatever bully of the week we're up against. I feel like I'm against boss after boss in some stupid video game that I'm bored of playing. Let's make something new. Sometimes it's easy to fall into thinking that we're so powerless, especially when we have wounded inner children and we've suffered quite a bit this go around. But I feel what we're up against currently is about life versus machines. Life made machines. Are we seriously going to let a bunch of android creepos, transhumanists, and those who support this life-denying system take us down? Look at the worlds you created in your mind as a child. Could they perhaps not want us to remember our power in these spaces? Could they want us to believe that they are all powerful, like the man behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz, when in reality it's always the inverse with them? So that means that we are actually powerful in our imaginative spaces and that they are powerless. That's why they mind control. That's why they traumatize. That's why they pump out constant fear. That's why Hollyweird was invented. Because bottom line, we are greater than that. They want us to forget and to fall in line with their robot army. And now we really need to start to use our creation abilities. We need to go to our inner child, who never complicates things with so-called adult ideas, reasoning, flowery language, gaslighting, etc., and we need to listen to truth. We need to step into our parental role and say, "I don't think so, buddy," and put an end to this tyranny. When you take the time to meet with your inner child, not only are you doing the hard work noticing and then transmuting the things that trigger you, but you take your power back. I've literally had to start from square one. Some of the trauma I experienced began in infancy. When one finally remembers that type of trauma, you kind of regress mentally to that state for a while. You have to work with your inner child to get them to feel safe, so you can soothe your nervous system and not always fly off into high alert. It makes some of the fluctuating mood swings easier to take too, when you recognize that it's coming from a childlike part of you who didn't have their needs met. Your inner child just wants their needs met. And since you didn't get that in childhood, and you can't get that from someone outside of you because it's your responsibility, you must reparent yourself and meet your need. Get curious. Ask yourself, what do I need in this moment? My inner child needed me to loosen up. You have to be comfortable with letting your strongholds crumble. The example I used previously of me controlling what I ate and maintaining a strict diet was a way of me controlling my life. It served its purpose and was great for that time, and I may go back to it in the future. In fact, I hope I do. However, when it comes to healing trauma for best results, you can't control the process. You must surrender to it and temporarily surrender to listening to and acknowledging your inner child. I used to hate hearing the word surrender. I'd think, like I'd surrender every time I was abused. And I'd dig my heels in and shout, "Hell no. I'll never surrender again." But my me team, which is all aspects of myself, like my higher self, spirit, my inner child, they told me for a very long time, surrender. Well, I resisted and tried to control what I surrendered to and what I didn't. For me, the simple word surrender kept me triggered. It took me over a year to finally listen to my intuition and just do it. When you're resisting something like that, it's like two bulls fighting. You aren't going to get anywhere other than in circles. When you surrender to your inner knowing, you are in the flow. You don't have a death grip on the process, and then the process can come to you. And please don't think I'm telling you to surrender to things outside of you. My intent is to illustrate that sometimes it's important to surrender to what's going on inside of you. Through this process of surrendering, I learned to trust myself even more, to trust my me team and source to get me to exactly where I need to be, which is sometimes nowhere on any given day. And if you're like me, facing trauma and the plethora of effects it's had on my mind, body, and spirit, you might want to avoid external craziness as much as possible. I've sat here on the sidelines, wrangling internal demons, patterns, and programs, and wondering how the heck I'm going to fight in the real world as I watch what's happening around us. And that's when I decided I can start kicking butt at home, in my own bed, in my own crystal layout, in my own meditative space in which I practice using my imagination. That's how I generated and increased in my metaphysical abilities, and how I started to see results in my healing journey. And I'm not special. We all have this, especially those who are trauma warriors. Take back your imaginative space and choose your adventure. What do you want to create? What do you want to build? You are the director of your own movie. I realize this might not be easy peasy because to exist in the fishbowl we currently live in, we still need to swim in the waters. However, invite your inner child to work with you and see where your imagination takes you. With enough of us creating what we want to see and imprinting that into the universe, we will elicit a powerful change. We are creators. Many of us have just forgotten. Each one of us is innately powerful, and especially those of us who have experienced trauma after trauma, like those of us who have had anomalous experiences, those of us who have suffered abuse in any of its forms, those of us who are MyLabs, abductees, those of us who know that not all is how it appears. We must take our inner spaces back. Like James says, it is a frequency war. He's spot on with that. Beam out the frequency you want, and this isn't in a la-di-da way. Check the news and what is called the real world every once in a while, but remember to live your life. I say this because I'd forgotten how to live. My inner child was repeating a pattern of worst-case scenario internally, based on the current external broadcasts and the parallel between my past and what's presently happening around us. When you work with your inner child, you become less likely to act out subconscious patterns and more in tuned and aligned with your truth and strength. We must remember to live, to love, and to create. I hope to meet all of you one day at the space where our collective imaginations join and we create a better space for all of us. And with that, I will wrap up part 1 of the Magelion's commentary on the Cosmic Switchboard Show. In part 2, I'll discuss how the imagination combines with intuition so you can do readings for yourself and others, how you can get to know your own me team in your imaginative space, and ways in which I've used my imagination to create an energetic shield around myself, as well as how you can use your imagination to generate healing. I'd like to thank our dear listeners, and if you like what we do and you believe in what we do, please go to thecosmicswitchboard.com and sign up and become a member. Bye for now.